The day was March 7th, 1965. John Lewis, a young civil rights activist seen here, was preparing to lead a march from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery to protest the violation of African-American voting rights in the Jim Crow South. Along with a group of some 600 peaceful protesters, Lewis was set to join icons like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Andrew Young, and Hosea Williams on the 54-mile endeavor. Before the historic march got underway, Lewis and Williams made clear to reporters why they were there and why they were undeterred by the potential danger of going through with such a public act of civil disobedience.
We're marching today to dramatize to the nation, dramatize to the world, that hundreds and thousands of Negro citizens of Alabama, but particularly here in the Blight Belt area, denied the right to vote. We intend to march to Montgomery to present certain grievances to Governor George C. Wallace.
Mr. Williams, what are you going to do if you get stopped?
What are we going to do if we get stopped? Well, we hope we won't get stopped. And if we get stopped, we're going to stand there and try to negotiate and talk them into letting us go ahead to Montgomery.
We all know what happened after that. Just as the hundreds of unarmed demonstrators finished crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, they were met with vicious racist violence, brutally attacked by Alabama state troopers with billy clubs, tear gas, attack dogs, and fire hoses. In the midst of the fight, John Lewis had his skull fractured, just one of dozens who needed to be treated for injuries at local hospitals. Those cruel, indelible images were broadcast across the country, and that day eventually became known as Bloody Sunday. The atrocity of Bloody Sunday helped move public sentiment and eventually galvanize the fight against racial injustice, leading to the passage of the landmark Voting Rights Act of 1965. And today, the struggle continues. The Supreme Court in recent years has rolled back key provisions of that very Voting Rights Act. States have enacted dozens of new voting restrictions, and a key platform of Donald Trump's new presidency is ending diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. For more on this, I am joined by Carolyn Randall Williams, award-winning poet and essayist, writer-in-residence at Vanderbilt University. She's also the great-great-granddaughter of Confederate General Edmund Pettus, who that bridge is named after, and Dr. Imani Perry, who is a professor of African-American studies at Harvard University and author of numerous books, including the award-winning South to America and Black in Blues, How a Color Tells the Story of My People. Caroline, your family is uniquely tied to today, to Bloody Sunday. The bridge, as I just mentioned, where this historic event took place, was named after your great twice-over grandfather, Confederate General Edmund Pettus. Talk to me about your thoughts on today as we mark the 60th anniversary of Bloody Sunday.
Thank you so much first for having me. And also, hi, Dr. Perry. I'm full of admiration for you. I'm very excited to meet you in cyberspace. When I think about what today means relative to my family's relationship to it, the word bridge means a lot to me because I think that we're trying to build bridges between the past and the present, between cultures, cultural norms that see two different sides of the truth. And I think to me, I'm thinking about how I'm sitting here as the descendant of a man who took up arms against the United States. He was a member of the Confederate States of America and then was somehow rewarded on the other side of that with a pardon, not very different from what happened to the January 6ers. He was somehow rewarded with a pardon and then invited to Washington, D.C. to represent Alabama as a United States Senator. And the weird repetition of the kind of ugliness and hypocrisy of that, I think that it's wild that we're sitting here 60 years after that bridge was brought back to light. And we're sitting here grappling with these same kind of rollbacks in justice and these acts of hypocrisy and these pardonings of treasonous American behavior. I think it frightens me that we're sitting here in this shared space and that we're looking back 60 years ago and seeing those realities reflected in the present.
Dr. Perry, I want to pick up exactly where Caroline left off in terms of what we process in terms of the lens of progress and how that should be viewed. Should we be taking from this moment that the things that we have done have been effective and we need to continue in that vein? Or should we be seeing this as a moment to perhaps reevaluate the need to change course and do some things differently?
I mean, in some ways, the answer is both. On the one hand, of course, we know the history of Bloody Sunday. First, there's the murder of Jimmy Lee Jackson, who was an organizer, leads to the first march. Amelia Boynton is beaten on that bridge to a bloody pulp. She had been organizing for voting rights since the 1930s in Alabama. And then there's the second march that is stopped short. And then James Reeb, a minister from Boston, is murdered. And then there's finally the third march. So one, there is this repetition of pushing for justice and retaliation from the state in various ways. And so in this moment of commemoration, we're asked to actually revitalize our commitment to justice. The work of the movement was undone. If anybody who goes to Selma and sees the injustice that persists there, I'm a native of Alabama. If you go to Selma and see the injustice that persists there, you know that we had unfinished business, that Selma did so much for the nation had not returned the favor. And now we have leadership that is trying to barrel us back multiple generations. So on the one hand, we have to hold fast to the transformations that have taken place, but we also have a responsibility not just to restore the status quo, but to actually complete the unfinished business of the freedom movement.
Unfinished business makes me think of the term good trouble as well, that John Lewis so aptly popularized. And I've been talking about that throughout not only today, but this week. Dr. Perry, I want to stay with you and ask, is there a concern when you see someone like Congressman Al Green be censured for his actions and have Democrats that actually support that censure, some of them? Is there a concern that the notion of good trouble no longer exists and that it's simply just a watered down phrase?
Well, it continues. The question is, do those who are in positions of power actually respect it? You know, oftentimes elected officials come down to Selma for Bloody Sunday and they march across the bridge. But the bigger question is, are you going to act in ways that are consistent with the vision of those who were on that bridge, who actually were confronting hostility from both sides of the aisle, as it were, even back then? And so I think the question is for us, those of us who are constituents of Representative Green and those of us who simply support him, to speak out even when many of his colleagues are failing him. You know, this is supposed to be a representative democracy, so we have to insist upon being represented appropriately. I believe that Representative Green represented many of us who find this moment in history absolutely unconscionable.
Caroline, I want to take you back to 2020, when America reckoned with the murder of George Floyd and the push to take down a lot of the Confederate monuments that were across the South. You wrote an amazing piece for the New York Times titled, "You Want a Confederate Monument? My Body is a Confederate Monument." And in that piece, you wrote, quote, "My body and blood are a tangible truth of the South and its past. The black people I come from were owned by the white people I come from. The white people I come from fought and died for their lost cause." And I ask you now, who dares to tell me to celebrate them? Who dares to ask me to accept their mounted pedestals? The irony that the bridge where Bloody Sunday took place is a literal monument to your great-great-grandfather. Those are just such powerful words. But I want to talk more broadly about how important you believe the symbolism in a moment like this is, not just of the bridge, but of the continued remnants of where we have been in our past in this country.
Well, I think we're living in this crazy moment of erasure of sin, as opposed to, you know, so many of us that are in the spaces of the humanities and of just being witnesses to history. We've been fighting to not have our truths erased, our Black history erased, our very existence erased. And now we're fighting to stop the erasure of sins against Black people by bad actors, by systems of government, by white people, by white supremacy. So to me, I think right now it's this disorienting circumstance of saying, hey, you can't tear that down because that is where wrong was done to us, and we have to name that this is what's happened. So the bridge we need to be able to recognize the bridge. We need to be able to name that these things have happened here. If we rename it, if we give it some innocuous name, then they're able to say, oh, well, that's so far in the past that we don't have to apologize for it and we don't have to navigate it anymore. And that's something I think about a lot relative to my relationship with claiming my genetic inheritance. And the hard side of it is that I'm waiting for other people who are the descendants of these white men who did these evils to Black people in this country to say, I am not proud of what my ancestors have done, and I am working towards repair. And there are not many people, I live in Tennessee, there are not many people that are coming out as the descendants of the Confederate generals and people in positions of power saying, I am sorry, and I am ashamed, and I want to repair. They want to forget. They want to forget. And so that's why we can't let these things be erased.
Dr. Perry, I'm going to give you the last word here. How do you frame for people who are watching the significance of this moment, looking backwards, but also appreciating the crossroads of where we are and what is ahead in terms of the fight for civil rights and the lens of how we have experienced history in this country?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I said before, this becomes a question of whether or not we're going to allow ourselves to be cast back multiple generations, or we're going to decide as individuals and as a collective to actually complete the unfinished business. It is important to remember that those people who kept trying to cross that bridge faced adversity from every possible corner. If they were able to do that, for us to have some greater semblance of democracy today, then certainly we should be able to follow in their example, not just in terms of what they did, but how they imagined freedom, facing new challenges almost at every turn. So they have given us a noble inheritance, and it is our responsibility to fulfill.
A real bridge that we are both still crossing